"84% of corporate universities will change by the year 2020. This change is going to be prompted by many different factors, which could include globalization, technology, and market volatility, just to name a couple. My request to all of you today is just to be open for the next 20 minutes about each of these elements and how it might apply to your organization. The benefit to you is that you might be able to influence some of this change moving forward. People are important. In the past, capital-intensive physical assets really drove competitive advantage. But today, the true sources of advantage are the people that drive business results. And because of that, a lot of companies are emphasizing leadership development, learning, and the emphasis on corporate universities. The first corporate university was established back in 1919 by General Motors. And from there, it just grew and grew into the 1960s, where it became indispensable for many companies like McDonald's, which opened 7 just during that decade. Today, there are over 4,000 universities, and it continues to rapidly grow, with the bulk of them in the United States. Companies in G20 countries have invested nearly $400 billion in training, with a large portion of that going to corporate universities. However, the main focus on the corporate university is still primarily a training center. The challenge now moving forward is how to elevate the corporate university's position so that it has more of a strategic focus and impact on the overall business. With that growth is coming a lot of change. I mentioned this at the beginning, but a recent Bpi Group survey found that 84% of respondents said that their business and operating model of their corporate university will change over the next several years as a result of many different factors. That includes globalization, the emergence of digital technology, financial constraints and market volatility, frequently changing strategies as well as customer and client needs, as well as the growing millennial demographic across the workforce. Given these factors, a lot of corporate universities are changing every single aspect of it, including target audience, the structure, how the corporate universities are governed and funded, how they track the impact on the business, the ROI, the alternative formats in terms of how content is delivered, and then lastly, the content itself is being adjusted given these factors. Before I continue moving forward, I want to give a quick introduction. My name is Mike McGowan. I lead the leadership and talent practice at Bpi Group, which is a global HR and management consulting firm. I directly advise business, HR, and talent leaders to realize business growth through many different talent management solutions, including crafting an organization's talent strategy, helping organizations with leadership development programs, succession management, performance management, and really everything within that talent management landscape. I work with a number of different companies across industries and sizes, but mainly companies that are going through significant change, whether it's through M&A, it could be changing strategies, as well as new leaders coming on board. We also have a lot of experience with corporate universities, both as an employee as well as consulting other companies on their corporate universities. In fact, recently Bpi Group held a U-Spring conference in Paris earlier this spring, focusing on reimagining the corporate university. We had about 600 different people representing their corporate universities talking about the changes and the future trends moving forward. We produced a white paper on this topic, which is available on the Bpi Group website. Today we want to focus on some of those key trends around what is changing about corporate universities. The first one is going to be around the structure of corporate universities. In the past, a majority of the universities were really centralized brick and mortar locations, and that's still a big presence, especially within the US today. However, over the last decade or so, many companies are evolving their universities into decentralized structures, which could be online portals, regional or local centers of learning, partnerships with business schools or academic universities, and even having third-party consultants come in and act as the corporate university. The reason for this is really twofold. One is around budget. It's very costly to build a huge facility and fly people in unless you are a huge global company. So many are relying on these alternative models to still reach that global audience and achieve their objectives, but within a certain budget. The other reason is because of cultural or regional preferences. In the US, a majority of corporate universities are still central brick and mortar locations because US companies tend to favor face-to-face learning, networking, as well as consistency of programming. China also favors physical locations, but for a different reason. They view these buildings as strong symbols of building their brand, both to customers as well as potential recruits. Australia and Europe, though, are on the other side of the spectrum where they really prefer distant learning and virtual learning as part of their corporate university structure. Government is another big change right now. In the US, there's very little involvement from government because they have little oversight in terms of training and development at various companies. In many countries in Europe, though, it is highly regulated by the government, with governments having heavy involvement with the funding of corporate universities, who's paying for what in terms of the learner paying for their classes versus the organization. How much the company needs to spend on each person varies by country and government. And then lastly, how accreditation becomes involved with each country and each company as well. This becomes even more complicated for multinational companies because they have to deal with multiple governments when spreading their corporate universities across the broader global company. I mentioned accreditation just now. One way companies have done this is by sending their people to academic universities or business schools to get their MBA or a specific certification versus having their own corporate university. However, with this is starting to change as well. Tuition reimbursement has fallen about 69% from 2005 to just 39% 9 years later, and it continues to fall. The reason for this is that it costs a lot of money to send groups of individuals to get these certifications or these advanced degrees. And also, a lot of companies are finding that they are losing key people to outside companies once they get these strong external certifications. So what are companies doing now? What they're doing is that they're bringing in professors in-house from these outside universities to provide that accreditation, but also to provide that outside expertise to complement the company way of doing things. The overall thing here is that corporate universities and academic universities are no longer separate entities or competitors in a way. They're becoming more of partners in finding the common goal for the broader company. Governance is another key change that is happening within corporate universities. Traditionally, these universities have been an HR initiative led by the CHRO or the CLO of a company. And while there are many benefits to this approach, there are some drawbacks, which include corporate universities becoming siloed and very separate from the rest of the C-suite, the strategy, and other functional objectives. So with that, a lot of companies are now shifting more towards a CEO-led model or a board-led model. That's not to say that the CEO and the board are running the day-to-day of the corporate university, but instead they have heavy involvement in setting the strategy, the programming, and the broader goals of that corporate university, and then also act as a key spokesperson both internally for employees, but also externally for potential recruits and customers as well. With this change in governance, there's also a big change in how corporate universities are being funded. In the past, a majority of corporate universities were acting as cost centers, where they might just be a separate line item on the budget each and every year. But a recent study showed that only 9% of corporate universities follow this model today. Instead, many are moving to one of two other models. For those corporate universities that are emphasizing more strategic and business focus, they're moving to a cost sharing or a chargeback model where they would charge the overall functions for the design and the delivery of providing those services to that function's employees. The other model is especially for corporate universities that are focused more on training customers or external parties. And these corporate universities are more of profit centers, where they are a company within a company. They have their own budget, they have their own revenue goals and margin goals. And these ones are truly an instrumental part of the company, the strategy, and the overall budget. It's also a big branding tool because they are focused more externally than internally. Given these funding changes, there's a big push for ROI right now. The good news with corporate universities is that they've been shown to outperform the broader market by 17 to 35%, and also beat revenues and profits of the margin average by about 2 and 3.5 times. The bad news, though, is that 94% of corporate universities spend little to no time and investment in tracking the ROI of business results. The reason for this is really it's difficult to directly tie the results of a CU or programming of a corporate university to a specific talent or business metric. And then also, quite honestly, many organizations cite that they have little time, budget, or analytical capabilities to truly track the efficacy and the ROI of their corporate university. However, with the move to more of a CEO and board-led corporate university, there is a stronger push on finding ways to track ROI. So many companies are now finding ways to track individual metrics in terms of how people going through are progressing on the soft skills that they're learning, or the technical skills for that matter. And that can be done via pulse surveys and ongoing assessments. There's also a move to tracking more organizational talent metrics, tracking the percentage of attrition or retention, as well as the percentage of promotions of individuals who might go through the corporate university programming. And then lastly, there are corporate universities that are tracking against specific business metrics, whether it be revenue, sales, number of sales, margin goals of the enterprise, or even specific functions that are sending their people through the corporate university as well. The target audience is also changing right now. So historically, most corporate universities really focus their programming around executives as well as high potentials, because they saw that these were the two specific groups that would add the most value to the company, so they wanted to invest in them. However, with this push on ROI, many corporate universities are finding that it doesn't make sense to spend so much and to have a dedicated corporate university focusing on such a small slice of their employee population. Instead, they're shifting to a model that focuses on the entire employee population, still providing high-touch and innovative offerings to those two special groups I just mentioned, but also finding more ways with both in-person and technology-based training to cover the rest of the population too. The alternative formats of delivering the offerings are also changing as well. So gone are the days of those pre-recorded video e-learning training sessions that many of us have experienced in the past. But with that, still, learning relies about 60% on technology-based solutions. So how are companies and corporate universities balancing that in-person and technology-based learning, and how do they make sure that they're complementing each other? Well, first, with the value of in-person learning, there's truly no substitute for in-person learning and networking. There's a lot of high-touch experience. There's a lot of relationships that are being made. And again, that's where people get the most bang for their buck in terms of providing strong input on their learning. Technology, however, is still a very critical component, especially for large companies and global companies who need to train thousands and thousands of people. It doesn't make sense to fly everyone to one or several locations because it become a costly endeavor for in-person learning. And then also, learners can't honestly put everything into practice from what they've learned in just a 1-day, 2-day, 3-day in-person seminar. They really need to create habits. So what companies are doing is that they're relying on mobile technology-based solutions to really reinforce and act as a tool to change and create those habits that were stressed in the original training. Gamification is also a big trend happening right now within corporate universities. We found that about 1/3 of organizations in corporate universities are using gamification as part of their broader curriculum. And for those of you who might not be familiar, gamification is really a computer simulation, or in a way kind of like a video game learning atmosphere, where the learner would go through many multi-storyline sequences that would allow them to adapt to different situations and develop. And it really provides them an engaging and fun way of experiencing learning. Another shift in the content is the focus on strategy. So many companies are changing their strategy not on a 5-year basis or even a 3-year basis, but it's really an annual basis or even more frequently. So with that change, the learning and the focus and the programming needs to change and adapt to align with those specific strategies. To pursue this, many companies are employing innovative and action-based learning to keep employees focused on that strategy execution. Action learning really follows that 70-20-10 adult learning model, where 70% of learning is acquired through experience, 20% is based on coaching and mentoring, and 10% is really traditional classroom content-focused training. What it does is it focuses on real or simulated business or talent problems and having the participants solve those problems during the course of several weeks or even several months. The great thing about it is no longer just PowerPoint training. It really gets the learner engaged on working on something that's very tangible, highly visible, and impactful on the broader organization. Executives love it because it gets their best and brightest people working on an issue that they haven't solved yet, or they just haven't had the time to solve yet. And they also get their people to learn at the same time. Bpi Group really focuses on action learning, especially when dealing with organizations in their corporate universities. Typically what we do is we work with about 20 to 30 high potentials or performers in one cohort that could last several weeks to several months. We would work with the company to choose and select either a real business or talent problem. It could be creating a new product or moving into a new market, would be the business problem, or for talent it might be solving for diversity and inclusion, or fixing the retention problem that a company might be going through. Over the course of these months, we would break that cohort into sub-teams and coach them through the ideation process, the business case development, market research, whatever the case might be, so that they're prepared to make recommendations at the end of the program to the executive or the board team on how to fix that problem. Throughout the program, it's not just a special project. There is learning that takes place. So we often infuse various training, both technology and in-person leadership skills training, innovation training, as well as one-on-one coaching and even mentoring programs to really complement the action learning component. Recently, we worked with a technology company that was really big in the 1980s and 1990s, but have lost a bit of their innovation prowess given a number of competitors rising in their market. the company really wanted to instill that innovation mindset back with their employees, so they worked with us to create an innovation-focused action learning program where on the learning end of it we provided an online platform as well as an in-person platform for them to get certified and get a digital badge in innovation, as well as having the people work through creating and recommending a new and innovative product for the company. The great thing about this is at the end of the program we had all 4 teams present to the executive team. 2 teams asked and received funding to pursue and build out the prototypes of their products, and now 2 of those products are in the commercial pipeline for the broader company. For those that did not get selected, they still won because about 90% of the people who went through the program were promoted within the next year. So again, something like this really benefits the corporate university, the individual, the executive team, as well as the broader organization. In closing, corporate universities are no longer just about offering training or being a training center. It's really about facilitating a journey for the individual and the organization to realize their strategy execution. It's still a bit too early to know how these 84% of universities will change in the next several years, but it's very clear that many are gaining success through a number of key factors, like engaging the CEO with the corporate university, making sure that the corporate university and its programming is connected to the company's strategy, measuring ROI and the impact of the programming on the broader business, marketing the corporate university both internally as well as externally, both to potential recruits and customers. And then lastly, providing a high caliber, innovative, and technology-based offering or offerings to be cutting edge and again align with the broader strategy. So with that, how do you see the business model at your university or company evolving over the next several years? Thank you.